Hello and welcome to the Learn New Testament Greek channel. My name's Tony and this is the first of the level 3 videos. It's going to be recapping what we've done in levels 1 and level 2 as we begin on the third level. Over the summer I've been remodeling this channel a bit and giving it a new name and a new logo. It's called Matheta Kaines Diathekes Hellenica, which means Learn New Testament Greek. And the logo with those words on Matheta Kaines Diathekes Hellenica that I've designed to help identify the channel, and also page numbers. This will help you to refer to particular slides, and if you want to ask me questions, it means you can identify a particular slide that you want to ask about. In this video, as we recap level 1 and level 2 material, we're going to take a look at the part of speech, cases of nouns, tenses of verbs, a few prepositions, definite articles, and conjunctions as we do a bit of revision. We're going to start by looking at John 13, and we're going to look for some of the aorist tense verbs, that is, the past tense once of. So I'm going to read it first in English. Keep an eye out for verbs that you think might have been translated from a Greek aorist. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garment and resumed his place, he, Jesus that is, said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that also you should do just as I have done for you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." Let's just go through that in the Greek first. Hote un enipsen tus podas auton. And when therefore he had washed the feet of them, kai eleban ta himatia autu, and taken his garments, or put back on his garments, kai enepesen palin apen autois, and having reclined again, he said to them, Genoskete te pepoieka humin. Do you know what I have done to you? Now there's going to be several questions that I ask you, so once again, as always, if you need a bit more time, then do hit the pause button. You can pause quickly on YouTube by tapping the spacebar. The first question is, can you spot the aorists? This text has been taken from the Interlinear Bible on Bible Hub, and underneath the verb you will get V for verb, and then the abbreviations, the letters, that will tell you the tense, mood and voice of that verb. Can you spot the aorists? Pause the video if you need more time. So remember, the aorist is usually a past tense verb and a once-off action. So he washed their feet, he had taken the garments and put them back on, and he reclined. In the last line, apen, he said to them, is also an aorist. So we have 4 aorists there. In the first aorist, an epsilon is added at the beginning of the verb, and a sigma is added at the beginning of its stem. So can you spot where they are? There are 4 words. Is that happening in each case for the first aorist, or are some of these second aorists? And if so, where are they? Pause the video if you need more time to work that out. So with the first one, enipsen, simply the epsilon has gone on the first letter there. So we've got nipto has become enipsen. So the e has gone on the beginning with a soft breathing and an accent upon it. But nipto, where there was a pi, it gains a sigma. So pi plus sigma turns it into a psi. And so we have a psi in there, enipsen, he washed. The next example of an aorist has gained an epsilon at the beginning. It's from lambano, so we've got elaben, but it's a second aorist. So the root of the word has been contracted from lamban to just lab. Added the epsilon augment, and then the epsilon nu at the end is this stem, which gives us the detail, basically, the third person singular bit. Then the third verb highlighted here is a first aorist, but it's a compound word that contains the verb pipto, but also before it the preposition ana. The epsilon has gone in this case in place of the alpha. And the alpha has been pushed off of ana, because if you put the epsilon before pipto, then epesen would begin with a vowel and ana would end with a vowel. So there's an elision there. It does happen. In fact, there's a word just a little bit before this where you get vowels on the end of words following where a word starts with a vowel, but generally speaking they do try to avoid it. So that's called elision, where they try to avoid elision. So the alpha has been pushed out, and then the words join together over time to form the compound word. So ana and pipto have become annepesen, and the epsilon, instead of being at the beginning, is at the beginning of where the verb starts, but after the preposition. Again, the sen bit at the end, the stem starts with a sigma because this is a first aorist, and then the en sound, the n, epsilon nu, gives us the inflection, it's called, to tell us that it is third person singular, the details that tell us it's third person singular. And last on this page we have apen, one of the most common aorists in the New Testament. This is also in the third person singular, but it's a second aorist, so the root of the word has changed as well. That is the verb he said. Another question before we move on past this bit: how can you tell that this is a perfect tense verb? And again, pause it if you need to. Pepoyeka. How do we know that's a perfect tense? With that word we had a doubling of the first consonant. It's also got the epsilon, and the kappa begins the stem with the thematic alpha in there in most cases. So poieto has become pepoyeka. Now if we were to look also at nominatives, accusatives and datives, do you remember what they are? The nominative is the subject in the sentence that does the verb. The accusative is the object that receives from the action of the verb. And the dative is an indirect object, something, a noun in that sentence or pronoun, not directly affected by the action of the verb. Can we spot here what are the nominatives, accusatives or datives? There are 4 words here that have been listed as either an accusative or a dative. The nominative in this case is Jesus. So which ones are the accusative and which are the dative? So in the first word we have podas, which we get podiatry from, meaning feet. That's accusative. The object, so he has washed that. It's received. Jesus, the feet are the object. Jesus is the subject doing the verb. In ipsen, he washed the feet. So the feet are the object receiving from the verbal action. And then we have himatia, the garments. Jesus takes them, and it's implied, therefore, that he puts them on. So they, again, are the object of the verbal action. In the last line, Jesus says to them. So they are in the dative here. So Jesus is saying, and they are hearing. And then it says also, do you know what I have done to you? An interrogative pronoun is used here. That's why it says I pro. That is, you may have spotted also the ans. That is accusative, neuter singular. And we're going to come on to looking at pronouns soon. But basically, interrogative, think of the word interrogate. It means to ask questions of. So, what is this? For example, maybe an interrogative. On this page, there are also two genitive pronouns. Can you tell what are they referring to? Two different things they're referring to. Again, pause the video now for time. You'll probably need a bit more time on each of these questions. I'm not expecting you to get them all, and I'm deliberately asking slightly tougher questions, by the way, because we're moving on to level 3, and if you've been with us for levels 1 and 2, it is time to step it up a bit. So I'm giving you some tough questions, so do hit the space bar and pause it and give yourself the time you need. So genitives are possessive. Personal pronouns have been used here. So autos, for the masculine, is the first person, is the nominative masculine singular, and that declines with autou for singular and auton for plural in the genitive. Genitive, of course, refers to either something that is owned by someone or in association with them. So in the first case, it's the disciples' feet, it's their feet, so they're going to be genitive. And in the second example, it's Jesus' clothes. So it's going to be a third person singular, autou, his garments. You will quite often find that there are small differences in word order here. So the garments of him or the feet of them. When you bring this into English and do your translation, that obviously kind of makes sense in this case to say their feet, his garments, because we don't tend to use that word order. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do when translating. So let's move on. We spent a lot of time in that verse. We're going to look now at verse 13. I'm not going to spend quite so long on every single verse. Humes phoneta me, ho didaskalos kai ho kurios. You call me the teacher and the Lord. Kai kalos legate. And rightly you say, amiga, for I am. First question, why is there a circumflex over the iota in phoneta? There are two reasons we get circumflexes in New Testament Greek. One is because it's a genitive, a possessive, and the other because there's been a contraction. In this case, where this ending has joined on to the stem of the word, a contraction has happened. Basically because there's too many vowels in there, so one gets pushed out, an extra epsilon gets pushed out, and the epsilon of the ending for second person plural, which is normally epsilon, tau epsilon, has joined the iota and pushed another one out. Next question. Why is there a capital letter here? Well done if you got the answer to that. It is for the start of speech. Now in this case we actually have a capitalization on the delta for didaskalos and on the kappa for kurios. Bible Hub has put that in there because it's a title used for either Jesus or God. That's what they normally do. It's basically an act of reverence that became common in the English language, but those capitalizations would not be there in the original text. So you might expect that didaskalos and kurios are actually in the accusative, but that's not the case. They're nominatives here. Why might that be? Well, where is the verb action going? You call me. So you, nominative, call the verb, and me, the accusative. So there's a very simple and very short statement there with a nominative, a verb, and an accusative. That's already happened. Then it goes on in the next clause to say what they are saying. So it's a new clause. That's why they're not accusative, because they're not the subject of phonata exactly, not in terms of their grammatical sense. It's a new clause. Also, it's a title that he's being named with, so we would expect nominatives to be used in a titular fashion, that is to give a title to somebody. Didaskalos kai hokurios. And then in the last line, he said, and rightly you say this. This harks back to the previous nominative of you, the disciples. That's the antecedent, the one that goes before, if you want the technical term. And then that last small clause, Amy Gar, for I am. Where there isn't a pronoun in there for I am, it is Amy can stand on its own. Sometimes it's ego Amy for I am, but we know that that's a first person singular use of the verb to be. So Amy Gar simply means for I am. Apologies for my predictably croaky voice, but you might notice this word Amy, I've mentioned it quite a number of times, and I put 2 points below. One has the same letters as the other, but one ends with a question mark and one ends with an exclamation mark. So remember this word, question. Do you remember it? I've mentioned it quite a few times, as in the I am sayings of Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am a good shepherd. I am a light. And I am the bread, and so on. Then there's remember this word, exclamation mark. So I want you to remember this word. It's one of the mu iota words, mi sounding words with a mi on the end. Now this is a separate group of verbs that behave differently to the ones we've learnt, and we're going to come back to them in level 3. So do remember these. This is probably the most commonly used, or one of those. There's not a massive list, but there's a short list that are used quite regularly. Aphiemi, didomi, Amy, and so on. Let's move on to verse 14. E un ego enipsa humon tous podas, if therefore I have washed your feet. Ho kurios kai ho didaskalos, the teacher and the Lord, kai humes opheleta alelon niptain tous podas. Also then you ought to wash one another's feet. I have a little suggested practice exercise for you. Again, you want to hit spacebar or click on the pause button to do this. It will take you a few seconds, but The word order is a little bit cumbersome here. Can you suggest a suitable word order for translating the sentence? So your English translations will vary slightly, although most of them are pretty close together on this one, but I think the most sensible word order would be, if therefore I, as your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, so also you should wash each other's feet. I just want to draw attention to these verbs here, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. Note here the tense and the mood. Anipsa, and then niptain on the bottom line are the same verb. One is aorist indicative and the other is a present infinitive. I'll come back to that verb because it's used a lot. But we have the personal pronoun humone there. Why does this one have a circumflex if it doesn't have a contraction? As I said earlier, circumflexes are also used for the genitive. Let's move on in the text and look at verse 15. Now, I've blanked out here the parsing for these words. Let's see if you can work out what type of word they are. Hypodeigma ga edoka humen, for I gave you a pattern. Hinakathos ego epoiesa humen, that as I did for you, kai humes poieta, as also you should do. Now there's a word that sums up each of these three words and their role that they play in these sentences. Can you think of what that is? They are conjunctions, and we use conjunctions to join words and clauses and to give transition points in a sentence or a verse. As we move on with level 3, we're going to look at subjunctives, which introduce sub-clauses, and we can get conjunctions with those to introduce them. So for example here we have hina, the conjunctive, and it's introducing a subjunctive where something happens in order that something else will do. And so it says at the end also you should do. Poieta is the subjunctive. So on Bible Hub the little abbreviation underneath will be V for verb, P for present tense in this case, then S for subjunctive. And it's also an active voice, second person plural. There are lots of conjunctions that we use in English, and pretty much you'll find a different Greek word for all of these, but actually sometimes some of those Greek words could be translated as more than one of these, and you need to use the full array when you do translation and get one to fit, because they're not always exact. So kai, for example, is the most common, is and, but sometimes it actually makes more sense to actually translate kai as with or also. So on the left here you have an acronym, fanboys. It's a handy one to remember. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. They are coordinating conjunctions. We have correlative conjunctions. These are sometimes used in Greek to introduce a subordinate clause. So that, or either, or if, rather, and so on. And then subordinating conjunctions. This is in English. So we might use a number of these for translating various words in Greek. Certain types of pronoun, certain subordinate conjunctions, certain subjunctive clauses. This table here is about the English grammar, by the way. It's not specifically for Koine Greek. Just to give you an idea of what we use in English. Do hit the pause button if you just want a little more time to consider that. But we will see that a number of words behave pretty similarly in Koine Greek. And I mentioned that subjunctive at the end, poiete. There's been a contraction, so it's got a circumflex over it. It comes from the word poieo, to make or do. It's an aorist. It's second person plural. At the bottom there, poiete, is a present tense subjunctive as well. And epoiesa on the middle line is an aorist first person. Both of these are in the active voice, and it is a first aorist word, so it does what we expect. So middle line here underlined in sky blue, epoiesa is the aorist first person singular, and then underlined in purple on the bottom line, poiete is a subjunctive. It's in the present tense, active second person plural. So let us just go through some of those tenses again and remind us what they do. I'd like you to try and join these up with their descriptions. I'll read them out, and then again you're probably going to want to hit pause to have the time to complete them. One of these tenses starts in the past and is brought to completion at some point up into the present. One is yet to happen. One is now and continuous. One of them is a once-off in the past. Another started in the past and is continuing. And the last one, it happened before another past tense event in the sentence. And well done if you got them. So the first one, started in the past and brought to completion, is perfect. It's being completed. Yet to happen, of course, is the future. The now and continuous one is the present tense. Normally, if something is in the present tense, it's going to be ongoing. If it's meant to be a once-off action in the present tense, the aorist will be used. A once-off event in the past will be the aorist. Something that started in the past and is continuing is the imperfect. It hasn't been completed. And then lastly, something that happened before one of the other past tenses, so before the imperfect, perfect or aorist, is the pluperfect. Something had happened, then something else happened, and then the present tense, and then something else is going to happen that's in the future. I'll take a little look also at aspect. Aspect I kind of talk of as being like the tense tells you which mountain to climb. The aspect is the view that you're going to get when you get there. So 3 of these have an aspect that is undefined. One has a completed aspect, and 2 have a continuous or progressive one. So let's start at the bottom. Continuous or progressive. So the present tense is continuous unless otherwise stated. Is continuous. The imperfect tense is also continuous. So usually translated as was doing something. The completed one is the perfect, where the aspect comes out of the fact that that verb action has been completed. Whereas the aorist and the pluperfect and the future are placed in a certain point on the timeline, but no other information is given about the ongoing consequences of that verbal action. So their aspect is undefined. The tense simply puts that word into a place on the timeline. Pluperfect before another past tense, the aorist a once-off in the past, usually occasionally used as a once-off in the present tense, but it will be clear if that's done. And then the future tense only tells us in the future. It could be something that's brought to completion, something that continues ongoing, or a once-off in the future. The future tense just tells us it will be in the future and has a completely undefined aspect. This is the table that I showed earlier in the year when we were doing the perfect tense. And again, pause on this page if you would like a bit of time to have a look. I've given some examples here of what they might look like in English. Aspect tells us how the verb, action, event or state is continued over time. Consider the implications, consequences and other actions arising out of the word in the tense that it is used in. There's a quote here. It comes from biblearc.com. Aspect is the way that the author invites us to view the verb action. So tense is sort of where it is on the timeline, and aspect is what it looks like when you get there. Another term we use a lot is mood. When linguists speak about a mood, what are they saying? Obviously it doesn't mean mood as in emotional, in a bad mood, having a bad day sort of thing. The mood is about the verbs, whether they are indicative, subjunctive, infinitive or imperative. There's also participles, which I'll come on to, but let's just have a look at these. So indicative is the most simple verb form. It makes a simple statement of a verb action. It could be used to express a wish or ask a question. Subjunctives lead to some sort of subclause. It can give mild encouragement to do something, an exhortation. It can say something needs to happen in order that something else can happen. It could be an expression of a wish. It could pose a hypothetical question, and so on. The infinitive is the basic meaning of the verb without any inflection on it. So Jesus went into the garden to pray. It doesn't say whether it's first person singular or third person plural or whatever. It just says to pray. Imperatives simply give an instruction or a command to do something. Around a third of all the verb forms in the New Testament are participles. There are lots, and it can be used in different ways. Sometimes it's described as acting similar to an adjective. It describes a noun. It modifies our understanding of it. It could be an adverb, or like an adverb, used alongside a verb, and it's modifying the characteristics we understand of that action. Participles can be used as a gerund. That is where they are used in place of a noun, therefore commanding or being subject to other verbs, or as part of a basic statement where there isn't another verb. Participles act as modifiers, modifying our understanding of other words in the sentences as well. Participles are kind of both verbs and nouns. They have verbal elements communicating tense, voice and number, but they also have noun-like endings giving us case, grammatical gender and whether they are singular or plural. And as I said, nearly a third of all verbs in the New Testament are participles. We're going to come on to learning them later on in level 3. Or at least beginning to dip our toes into them because there's lots to do. Let's move on to look at verse 16. Kathos ego epoiesa humin, as I did to you, kai humes poieta. So that's what we've just done. Then it goes on in verse 16, amen, amen, which means literally, truly, truly. Lego humin, I say to you, uk estin doulos metzon tu kuriou autou. A servant is not greater than his master. Ud apostolos metzon tu pempsantos auton. Nor is a messenger greater than the one that sent him. So the next thing I want to think about is just a bit of the vocabulary, really. We've been using a lot of words in John that are very common. Poieo is the verb to make or do. Lego is the verb I say. Kai will be usually translated as and, but as I said before, sometimes it's also translated as also. Ego is I, which we get ego from, and amen, which we get amen from, is let it be, truly, or in the older versions, verily. Some of the other very common words that we've seen here is kuri or kuriou, meaning O Lord or our Lord in the genitive. Apostolos, an apostle, one who is sent or sent away from, apo and stolos. Uk is an adversative, a negative meaning not. Estin means is, third person singular verb to be. And pempo, I send. I mentioned earlier the verb nipto as well. We've seen this used several ways. Niptain is the infinitive, to wash. Enipsa, the aorist in the first person, I washed. Enipsen, again, the aorist in the third person, he washed. And niptera is a noun that comes from the same root, so it's going to be the clean one, the one who's been washed. We often see in the Bible, katharizo is the verb used for cleaning, which we get cathartic from. Katharizo is more about the whole body and about spiritual cleansing and about purification. Nipto tends to be a more functional sort of thing. It's used for ritualistic washing. It's usually focused on the hands and the feet rather than the whole body. So Jesus says that once he's washed the hands and feet, there's no need to wash the whole body because the whole body is already clean. And when he says you're wholly clean, the word katharizo is used. So that brings us to the end of this video. As we continue in level 3, we're going to look at this level at pronouns, lots of different types of them, and adjectives. So there'll be two parts to that. Firstly, the pronouns, secondly, the adjectives, but they naturally go together. Then subjunctive, the mood, which we'll spend a few weeks on and then do a bit of practice. The infinitive mood, mu, iota verbs, which as I've said are a little bit different to normal verbs. The imperative mood for instructions and commands, and then participles. I thank you for joining me and going through this practice and recap on levels 1 and 2. Do check out next 3.1 A and B on pronouns and adjectives. Thanks for coming. Goodbye and God bless. If you'd like to receive updates when new videos are uploaded, do please click subscribe, and on the screen now you'll see some suggestions of other videos that you could watch on this channel.